Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum. So the agreement is that, and you guys have already agreed to it, whether you agree to it or not, is that you guys can continue eating, and I'm going to begin my portion of tonight's discussion. Okay? Is that a deal? So you can eat while I talk, but you can't talk and eat. Okay? Deal? Okay. I'm a teacher, so I'm always negotiating with my students. So we are in a negotiation. All right, so the topic of my discussion tonight is domestic violence, the Blanche of male entitlement. You guys follow me? So while I'm going to broaden my language a little bit to accommodate everyone, the undertone of my talk will be specifically to the Islamic community. Because domestic violence is a reality in the Islamic community. And those of you who know me know that I'm not one to sugarcoat. I believe in standing in your authentic truth, whether it's for you or against you. And that is a principle of our religion. And it's something that I don't shy away from. Many in the Islamic community would like to live in the oblivion of this reality, but we ask God to unmask reality and let us see it for exactly what it is, and give us the ability to follow what is best, and to save us from being deluded from the reality and avoiding what is best for us. So let me begin by praising God, praising Allah the way that He deserves to be praised. And when I say Allah, I mean Almighty God. The word Allah is an Arabic word that means, if we had to break it down from an Arabic perspective, it means Al-Ilah, which means the only God. That's all Allah means. It doesn't mean it's the God of the Muslims or some, God that only Muslims worship, right? When we use the word Allah, we don't necessarily use the phrase God, because God is a generic term that could refer to any type of deity. So when we use the word Allah, when a Muslim hears that, and Muslims are not the only ones that actually use the word Allah to refer to God, all right? But when we use that phrase, automatically we're talking about God Almighty. All right? So I'll begin my talk with praising Allah the way that He deserves to be praised, and send peace and blessings and salutations upon Prophet Muhammad and upon his family and the rest of the prophets and messengers. Every time authority is mentioned in the Quran or in the practices of Prophet Muhammad, may peace and blessings be upon him, it is done so by attaching to that authority the consequences of abuse of that authority. There's not one place in the Quran where authority is used except that the consequences of abuse of that authority is also mentioned along with it. Prophet Muhammad, in one of his traditions, he sent a companion of his by the name of Mu'adh ibn Jabal. He sent him to what we know today as Yemen. And during that time, Yemen was predominantly Christian and Jewish territory. And he said to Mu'adh, he said, إِنَّكَ تَأْتِي قَوْمٍ مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ. You are going to a people from the people of the book. People of the book meaning the people of Scripture, meaning Jews and Christians. He said, the first thing that you should invite them to is the main concept upon which the whole entire religion of Islam rests, and that is La ilaha illallah. There is no God or deity worthy of worship except God. And all the way down, and he begins to explain the 5 pillars of Islam. And then he gets down to zakat, which is the charity that we take from 2.5% of our wealth on a yearly basis, provided that you meet the bare minimum. And the bare minimum, it fluctuates because the price of gold fluctuates. So it could be between 5,000, 5,200, depending on the price of gold. And you take 2.5% of that, All right, and then you give that as charity to the different categories of people that are entitled to it. And he said, do not take the best of their wealth. He said, take from the mediocre or the that which is not the best of their wealth. And the point here is, he said, he said, and be cautious of the cry or the supplication of the oppressed person. Meaning, on your mission, on your journey to go talk to people about Islam, be mindful of oppressing people. He said, because there is nothing that stops the supplication of the oppressed person from reaching God. If a person is being taken advantage of, is being oppressed, rights are being taken away from them unjustly, when they call out to God, they have a certain privilege that the average from amongst us do not have. All right? So there was a caution, there was a warning to be mindful of taking rights away from people that you are not entitled to take. Be cautious of the supplication of the oppressed person, because there's nothing that stops the dua of the oppressed person from reaching Allah. One of the most hated sins in Islam, as it relates to the way that human beings interact with one another, is oppression. Our interaction with one another as human beings is just an extension of our interaction with God. You can't possibly believe that you can treat another human being any way you want and then have a great relationship with God. It doesn't work like that. All right? And this is, I hate to go there, but this is why slave owners use verses from the Bible to justify the torture of slaves. Because the only way that they could sleep at night was to pathologize that behavior. By using verses from the Bible, scripture, to justify that behavior. But one of the most hated sins to God as it relates to how human beings interact with one another is oppression. As a result of his abhorrence of this sin, Allah has made it even forbidden for himself to oppress his creation. Prophet Muhammad said that Allah said in a hadith which is known as Hadith al-Qudsi, he said, Inni haramtu dhulma ala nafsi. I have made it forbidden for me to oppress my creation. وَجَعَلْتُهُ بَيْنَكُمْ مُحَرَّمًا فَلَا تُظَالَمُوا. And I have made oppression wrong, forbidden between yourselves, so don't oppress one another. God is not going to task you with more than you can bear. God is not going to hold you accountable for things that were beyond your control or your capacity. These are verses all throughout the Quran. لَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا مَا آتَاهَا. That Allah will not charge a soul with more than it has the capacity to bear. لَا يُكَلِّفُ اللَّهُ نَفْسًا إِلَّا وُسْعَهَا. As one of the verses we recited in the Salah. That Allah will not put on a soul more than it has the capacity to bear. That would be oppression. Alright? Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that Allah said that I have made oppression forbidden for myself, and I have made it oppression forbidden amongst my creation themselves, so don't oppress one another. In addition, men are reminded that their authority within the institution of marriage, their authority is on loan to them from God. You are not the authority. The authority that is given to man within the construct of a marriage is on loan to him by the real authority. And Allah reminds us of that in a very famous verse in the Quran that Muslim men like to use to show their authority over their women. And without even quoting the verse, I'm sure you guys already know what verse I'm talking about. What verse am I talking about? Huh? No. Which verse am I talking about? There you go. Men are the protectors and maintainers of their women. This is the very famous verse that Muslim men like to use when they want to show their authority over their women. الرِّجَالُ قَوَّامُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. That men are the protectors and maintainers of the women. But we don't go all the way to the end of the verse. We usually stop right there. That's the irony of it, right? We usually stop right there, right? But if you go all the way to the end of the ayah, Allah ends the verse by saying, إِنَّ اللَّهَ كَانَ عَلِيًّا كَبِيرًا. that God is Ali, is above everything, Kabira, and he is the greatest, and he is the authority. As a reminder to men that although you have this status within the institution of marriage, the system of patriarchy, you are the patriarch of your family, but the authority is given to you as a Muslim man is given to you on loan by the only authority, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of Prophet Muhammad's last addresses to his community was about the treatment of women. He knew that the system of authority given to the Muslim man by default of the institution, by default of being a husband in the institution of marriage was a privilege that, if abused, could create a toxic experience, sometimes irreparable experience for the woman. Prophet Muhammad, he said, "Istawsu bin nisa'i khayra." This is one of his last sermons. This is actually the last sermon that he gave to his community. He said, "Istawsu bin nisa'i khayra." Treat the women well. Out of all of the things that he could have addressed in his last address to his community, he made sure that he included in that address women. And much like what the speaker before me mentioned, that sometimes as men, we think that to speak on behalf of women is somehow makes us weak. So we avoid speaking out on behalf of women because we want to maintain this, the boys' club, right? We want to maintain this masculinity. We want to maintain solidarity with our brothers, in masculinity. Not realizing that we are actually doing ourselves a disservice, because if you didn't know, I'll tell you now, most of our karma is in our children. Most of the things that we put out into the world comes back to us through the children that Allah blesses us with. Let that marinate for a second. So he said, treat the women kindly. He said, for indeed, these women are with you in the institution of marriage like captives. Meaning you have certain authority, you have certain rights over them. They have rights over you as well, but the authority that you have kind of leans more towards the men by default of being the man. So being conscious and being aware, being cognizant of the authority that you have over them. All right, and treat them kindly. This does not denote the inferiority of the woman in the institution of marriage, but the authoritative position that the men hold over them as their husbands. And let's be clear about something. The system of patriarchy predates the religion of Islam. In all religions and in most cultural traditions, from the east to the west, man is given some degree of authority, sometimes within reason and sometimes without. Due to the responsibility that rests on his shoulders regarding the protection and maintenance of his family. Patriarchy is not, an anomaly. Islam is not an anomaly for patriarchy. These were things that predated Islam. What the religion of Islam came to do was actually institute, laws and guidelines by which patriarchy cannot exceed its limits. And establish laws and guidelines to govern the smokescreen of male entitlement that has held women in positions of inferiority for generations. That's what Islam came to do. Islam says, okay, you can be the patriarch, you can be the man, but there's some restrictions that come along with that. And you have to abide by those restrictions. All right? Islam didn't come to say that, Muslim men are the sole authority over their women, because even when women, we throw this word around, obey your husband. I changed that language because I think with language comes a culture. And it's not obedience, it's a willful compliance. Women have a right to choose to comply or not. It's not just obey your husband, sister. We like to throw these broad terms out there. Obey your husband, which, is code word for shut up. You don't have a voice. Be quiet. I have the last say. You understand? That's code word. And as men, we understand that. Nobody had to tell us that. That's a culture that was created from this misogyny that he was talking about earlier. Fast forward to a time and an environment where patriarchy, even within the Islamic community, has been given carte blanche with very little accountability. Very little accountability in the Islamic community for, this entitlement that men have, and it goes unchecked. Domestic abuse, just like any other form of oppression, permeates any environment where those in authority care more about the preservation and perpetuation of the system that keeps them in power rather than the individuals that they govern. I'll say that again for the folks in the back that didn't hear me. Domestic abuse, just like any other form of oppression, permeates any environment where those in authority care more about the preservation and perpetuation of the system that keeps them in power rather than the people that they govern. This is how in the Catholic Church, young boys can be molested and taken advantage of, and rather than put in jail or put on trial and let the law deal with them, we'll just shuffle them around. We'll put them in another church. We'll put them, in front of another congregation, because we have to preserve and maintain the power structure that keeps us in the positions of authority, rather than care more about the people that we are supposed to be. We're supposed to have their best interests at heart. You guys follow me? That's the way it works. Good governance, according to the Islamic tradition, is more about people having a healthy and balanced relationship or experience under an authority that has their best interests at heart rather than the continuance of power. Abu Bakr, Prophet Muhammad's companion, who became the leader of the Muslims after his demise, he gave his first khutbah, his first address to the public, to the Muslim community. And listen to the words that came out of his mouth. As he mounted the minbar, the podium, he said, "Inni wulitu alaykum wa lastu bi khayrikum." I was placed over you, although I am not the best from amongst you. He said, "Ad-da'ifun fikum qawiyyun indi." Those who you consider weak in your eyes are strong in my eyes, especially when I take their right of charity, of zakat, from you and give it to them. Meaning the only reason why you consider them weak is because of the privilege that you have of keeping your money and keeping your positions of power. But you will be weak in my eyes once I take that right from you and give it to the people that deserve it. That was his first address, showing you that good governance is about being concerned with the people that you are over, rather than continuing, and perpetuating the system of power. When a woman from the tribe of Makhzum, and I'm going to get to my point, when a woman from a tribe called Makhzum, and in a pre-Islamic Arab society, there was heavy nepotism, there was double standards, all of those things. And Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he came to challenge that, because that was a system. When we talk about racism, we talk about systematic racism. We're not talking about individual prejudices. Oh, this person doesn't like me because I'm black, or this person doesn't like me because I'm Hispanic. That's a personal preference, a personal prejudice. I'm talking about systematic racism, where you are not allowed to walk into a bank and get a loan, where you are not allowed to have certain jobs, where you're not allowed to do this or to do that. And someone can say, well, what is stopping you? The sky's the limit. If you understand how systematic racism works, I would not have to explain myself. But sometimes people sit from a place of privilege and they say, well, black folks have been in this country for years. My father came from this place and migrated here. And this is very important in the Islamic community, because a lot of Muslims, especially second, third generation Muslims, they will use this phrase of, my parents came from this place or that place, Palestine or this place, and they came here and they built a better life for themselves while you guys have been here the whole entire time. To dismiss, there's no greater dismissal of us as a people than for you to use the privilege that has been given to you to completely erase and completely dismiss all of the struggles that we've been through. There was a time when African Americans, this is not a black history lesson, but in fact it is. It's a teaching moment. I'm a teacher, so I seize the opportunity to teach. But there was a time in our society when we weren't even allowed to vote. There was a time in our society where a black person wasn't even allowed to walk into a hotel like this. And you have the audacity to tell me that your family came from this country and that country, and you guys went to college and you have a nice home and you live in very well for yourselves and African American. So we just been here this whole entire time doing nothing? Are you serious? There was a time when black people couldn't even ride on a bus. We had to sit in the back of the bus. You understand? So, we have to be careful not to use dismissive language. All right, even amongst ourselves as Muslims. I mean, we throw the term out here, we're all Muslim. We're not all Muslim. You're an African American, you're this, you're that. Acknowledge us as we are. That's part of our religion. Even Allah says in the Quran that we created you into different nations and tribes, لِتَعَارَفُوا, so you may acknowledge one another. Don't say, I don't see color, because that within itself is racism. It's called aversive racism. I don't see color. Well, then that means that you don't see me. Last I checked, I was a person of color. Don't say that. That doesn't make me feel better when you say, I don't see color. We're all just Muslim. That's actually offensive. But getting to my point, that this woman from the tribe of Makhzum, which was very prestigious tribe, as you know, in pre-Islamic Arab tradition, they functioned, their hierarchy of society was based upon tribalism. It's still like that to today, but just giving you a glimpse. So this woman from the tribe of Makhzum, she stole something. And so many of the Prophet's companions were debating about who was going to intercede with Prophet Muhammad about her. Finally, they decided on a companion by the name of Usama ibn Zayd, a young companion who the Prophet was very fond of. And when Usama came to Prophet Muhammad said to him, are you trying to intercede for someone in the face of a punishment from God? Like, you can't intercede in that. It is what it is. And this was a vivid example of the system of double standards that usually accompanies the larger system of oppression designed to further the power structure of the elite. An African American can be found guilty for something, we'll throw the book at him. A Caucasian can be found guilty of the same exact crime, and he'll get counseling. Right? You flush drugs into the African American community, and everyone caught with, in New York, a crack cocaine, a piece of crack cocaine could get you 3 to 5 years. But a Caucasian get caught with the same amount or more, and he needs drug treatment. The system of double standards, that it exists in every system that is designed to keep the power structure the way that it is. So the Prophet was confronted with the same thing. And he continued to engage them about the pre-Islamic behavior that allowed for the elite to circumvent punishment while the poor and less fortunate were punished to the fullest extent of the law. He made it clear that Islam is a system of justice, a system of checks and balances, irrespective of one's tribal superiority or socioeconomic status. He said that the nations who came before you were destroyed because if someone from the elite stole, they would be overlooked. And if someone who was impoverished, less fortunate, stole, he would be punished to the fullest extent of the law. He said, Waymullah, I swear by Allah, Lo anna Fatima bintu Muhammad sariqat laqata'atu yadaha. He said, I swear to God, if my own daughter Fatima stole, I would cut her hand off. There is no double standard. Which moves me to my point, is that in the Islamic community, there is double standards. There's double standards as it relates to domestic violence. Because if a man goes to the imam of the community and says that his wife is not doing this and doing that, she's going to get every ayat and hadith known to Islam. But the Muslim man can beat his wife, and we'll know about it, and we'll stand next to him in the prayer. We'll give him greeting of salam after the prayer is over, and we'll continue on as if nothing happened. The same man can divorce his wife and be married multiple times within the same community, and no one will say anything about it. The imam, how could you sit in front of this man, marry him to multiple women within the community within a year, 2 year span, and not ask the man, what's the problem? But if a woman is married more than once or twice, forget about it. Nobody wants to marry her. It's the double standards. It's almost like the masajid, the places of spiritual healing, places where we're supposed to go and remember God, has become like a boys' club, where we protect each other, we protect one another, and we never get to the root problems of a lot of the issues in our communities. In addition, laws were established that secured the autonomy of Muslim women, even within the patriarchal system of marriage. A man came to Umar ibn al-Khattab and he said, I married a woman and she stipulated in her marriage that I do not remove her from her home, meaning she wants to stay where she is. He said, but I have already made intentions that after I marry her, I was going to relocate somewhere else. And Umar said to the man, he said, Laha ma sharatat. He said, for her is what she stipulated in her marriage contract. Meaning if you agree to it, then that's what it is. So he said to Umar, and this is my point, he said, then what will become of men who marry women who can stipulate something in a marriage contract and then when she's not given it, she can demand a divorce? What will become of us as men? Umar said to him, Inna maqati al-hukuk and the shurut. He said, all of the rights that you believe you have as a man are totally overlooked when you sign your name on that marriage contract. Understanding that a woman is not in a relationship to cater to man's every whim helps to reduce the frustration and mixed emotions that tends to lead to domestic abuse on every level. Domestic abuse, brothers and sisters, of any kind starts with the belief of entitlement. That's where it starts. I am entitled. As a man, I am entitled. I can hurt you. I can cheat on you. I can do whatever I want to do to you. You are my property. I own you. Even in our society here today, a woman marries a man, takes on his last name, and you begin to identify yourself through him, almost as if you don't even exist. This stuff is saturated into our society on levels that you can't even imagine. A woman marries a man, comes from a whole family, has her father's last name, and then she marries her husband and then takes on her husband's last name as if she doesn't even matter. Prior to, this modern society that we live in, women were inherited. In pre-Islamic Arab culture, a woman was inherited. When her husband died, her husband's brother, his father, whatever, inherited her as property to do with her whatever they want, right? And, in Roman society, women were just passed around like chattel. So understand that the domestic abuse of any kind starts from the belief that as a man you are entitled. And the measures that are used are applied sometimes when we talk about domestic abuse. Some of the measures that a domestic abuser applies is based on a couple of things. Number one, his knowledge of her weakness. You have some men who are so weak who sit back and look for the things that are important. That is a vulnerability. Love is a vulnerability. Because when you love something, people can now see what you're vulnerable to and they use that against you. The greatest vulnerability is love. So some weak men in relationships with women, they sit back and they watch what is important to you, and then they use that against you. Number two, what he was exposed to growing up speaks to the point that you mentioned earlier. What he was exposed to growing up. In the situation between Chris Brown and Rihanna, Chris Brown, we didn't know before that his mother was exposed to being abused. He saw abuse. I watched this documentary literally in tears, man. You're talking about a 7-8-year-old kid who's living in a 2-bedroom apartment with his mom and her boyfriend, and he's listening to his mom get beat in the next room. And then have to walk out and see the guy who just abused your mother, and you're a 7-8-year-old kid. There's nothing you can do about it. So this is what you were exposed to. Number three, what has worked for him in the past? Maybe using abuse has got him his way. These are how bullies are created. Bullies are created because they bully people, they get away with it, and now they learn that this is how I get my way. So this is the way that the abuse is perpetuated. And lastly, second to last, what he will allow to be exposed. And lastly, how effective it is in allowing him to achieve his goal of dominance over her. Understand something, domestic abuse is not about physical abuse. Domestic abuse is solely based upon control and dominance over another human being. Sometimes the measures that are used are financial. Sometimes the measures that are used are physical. Sometimes the measures that are used are psychological, gaslighting, making you think that you're losing your mind, won't take accountability for what they do. Absolutely. Have you losing your mind because you're like, am I the only one seeing this? Every time he's a moving target. Every time you try to corner him to make him take accountability for something, he finds a way to wiggle himself out of it. So let me just mention a couple of things that we can do or we need to do to begin changing this narrative in the Islamic community. Number one, we need to work towards changing the belief within our boys, starting from their young age, that they are not entitled to control somebody. That's not what God put the woman here for you to control, for her to, lean towards your every whim and desire. This is fixing the problem within before attacking it from without. What we're doing now is attacking it from without. We're speaking out against it. We're bringing awareness to it. This is attacking the symptoms. We got to get to the root of the issue, which is the entitlement that many of our boys have. They watch their fathers and how their fathers interact with their mothers, and they believe that this is normal, healthy, male-female relations. And it's not. So attacking the problem from the root rather than addressing the symptoms. We need, in Islam, unfortunately, in many of the masajid, most of our mosques will not even have a boys, program. Go to your average mosque if you don't believe me, and pitch it to your average mosque. Can we have a young men's group? And if the imam is not going to be at the head of that young men's group, it ain't going to be no young men's group. Meanwhile, he's part of the problem. He probably needs to be in the men's group himself. Guarded by, his position of authority over the community. There needs to be, number two, a system of accountability, checks and balances within the Islamic community. We can't rely on the mosques and imams as much as American citizens can rely on the police and the municipal laws to keep them protected. A simple piece of paper of a restraining order is all you have at your beck when it comes to domestic abuse. That's all you have. The only thing that stands in between you and being murdered by a man who has absolutely no control over his emotions is a piece of paper that is only enforced after he puts his hands on you. And we're a first world country with all of the technological advancements known to man. And the only protection that we can offer a woman in our communities is a piece of paper, a restraining order. He's not to come within 50 feet of you. Okay, what if he comes within 50 feet of you? Who's there? You're going to call the cops, and depending on what neighborhood you live in, it'll take about a half an hour before they get there. By that time, you're dead. By that time, you're already in the hospital. And in the Islamic community, it's even worse. Because when a woman goes to the mosque to complain, she's told, be patient, sister. Be patient with what? What do you mean, be patient? How is that sound advice? We would remove a dog or an animal from a home that is being abused by its owner. How much more would it be for a woman who's being abused by her husband to tell her to go back to the same home where she was the first time and go tolerate more abuse? Be patient. How is that sound advice for any human being? How is that sound advice? How is that okay in the Islamic community? How? It's unacceptable. So there needs to be a system of accountability. All right? We have to find another way to hold people responsible. I have some things in my mind that can help, and I'll mention those sometime in the future. But I think that there's a few things that we can do to begin holding people accountable, and it starts with exposure. An entire profile can be created on you and posted publicly. so that no matter what community you go to, people are aware. Social media can be such a great tool if you use it in the right way. Right now, I'm streaming this on Periscope. I have about 25,000 followers. All I got to do is mention your name, your whole profile, and 25,000 people know who you are. Social media can be very powerful. And we can't be driven by fear. Number 3, sisters have to avoid going into situations without a male guardian or some type of male representation. Women have to hold themselves accountable and responsible. I'm not saying that she is deserving of the abuse, but there are things that women can do in the Islamic community that can help reduce the number, the levels of abuse that go on. Some of it is as a result of living in this world that we're all Muslim and everybody's got your best interests at heart, but let me tell you, they don't. We're living in a very narcissistic environment where people believe that the entire world revolves around them and their wants and their needs. And you are there to serve their needs. Most of our relationships function like this. We're a society of sociopaths. A society of parasites just sucking the energy out of other people until you get what you want from the person and then it's off to the next person. That's what a parasite does. And many of our friendships, people don't call you until they need you. You haven't heard from the person in months. Then when they call you, hey, how you doing? I'm fine. Hey, what are you doing tonight? It's the only reason why you called me. So I think that you have to be a little bit more cautious and not to engage in relationships with men unless you have some male representation. Men speak the language of other men. Men understand men. And a man who is a domestic abuser will think twice knowing that this woman has a father, knowing this woman has a brother or brothers that actually give a damn. They will think twice before putting their hands on someone. But when a domestic abuser, what he does is he tries to get you on an island by yourself, isolate you. I don't like you hanging out with them. Oh, your friends are un-Islamic. Their behavior is this. And when you start seeing a person trying to move you over to an island all by yourself, you can only wait for the abuse to start. And abuse is already starting because he's manipulating you mentally. Your mother is a problem. Why is your mother always in our business? Because she's my mother. What do you mean, why is my mother always in our business? Yeah, provided there should be some boundaries to that, but my mother is never going to go away. There will never be a relationship between me and you without my mother. That's not going to happen. I mean, why is that okay? But this is the mental manipulation that happens. Number 4, know the signs of a domestic abuser. Domestic abuse is about control, dominance. Not the result of anger issues. Oh, my husband has anger issues. He don't have anger issues. Nah. Stop pathologizing. Call it what it is. Oh, my husband has some anger issues. You don't have some anger. Punching you in your face is not some anger issues. That's beyond anger issues. Grabbing you by your throat, choking you to the floor is beyond anger issues. Stop pathologizing. Stop making excuses for that and call it what it is. And in the Islamic community, he needs to fear Allah. My husband, he needs to fear Allah. No, your husband is beyond fearing God. Because a domestic abuser can go to the masjid for Salatul Fajr at 5:30 in the morning, 6:30 in the morning, make his prayer, read Quran after he finishes, make his remembrances of God in the morning, and then return home and beat you. Don't think that he can't master both. As domestic abusers, they usually have this Jekyll and Hyde mentality. That's usually some of the qualities of a domestic abuser. He turns off and on, hot and cold. 1 minute he's the nicest person that you could ever meet, and in a flip second he becomes somebody completely different. Almost as if you guys are complete strangers. Meanwhile, you've been married 10, 15, 20 years. So, understand the signs. Know the signs of a domestic abuser. What you're getting into. Number 5, stop enabling the abuse out of fear of, I don't want to break up my marriage. I don't want to break up my family. Yet you sit and watch your children become traumatized, and your children are going to hate you later or become you later. Your son is either going to become a domestic abuser, or your daughter is going to become an enabler of domestic abuse because she saw her mom do it. She saw her mom do it. And we do this under the guise of, I want to keep my family together. I don't want to break up the family. I don't want to ask for a divorce or whatever the case may be. No, you got to do what's right. That's what it means to be a parent. That's what it means to be an adult making hard decisions. Because even if you stay, the damage is more traumatizing in you versus you staying versus you leaving. Children will get over divorce and separation of their parents. Most of the time they do. Statistically, they say it takes about 7 years for a child to completely process the separation of their families. And that's provided that when they separate, they're still in a healthy environment. They can process that. How long will it take a child to process the trauma of watching their father beat their mother? So we have to stop enabling out of fear of breaking up the marriage. Just because your husband is not hitting you doesn't mean that everything is okay. Well, he didn't beat me today, so everything is okay. No, everything is not okay. Everything is not okay. With just a push of a button, he can, become very violent towards you. Just because he didn't hit you today doesn't mean that everything is okay. All right, our religion is founded on the principle of sincere advice and meeting oppression wherever it is, head on. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ never gave advice to a woman in his community to be patient, ever. There was never a situation where a woman came to him complaining about the abuse of her husband, except that he solved the problem right there on the spot. He never told the woman to go back and be patient. Got 2 more and then I'm done. Number 6, get help. If you notice signs of domestic abuse, both parties need to go see a counselor to help the husband identify these traits within himself and begin making the necessary changes to have a happy, healthy marital experience. If you start to notice signs, you can catch it early. Get help. Don't keep using Islam as an excuse to allow unhealthy, toxic behavior exist in your marriage. We'll see things, red flags, and we'll ignore them. They're only going to get worse. We have to get help. I don't know what it is in the Islamic community, but it's almost like going to see a counselor, going to get help. It's like blasphemy. Completely taboo. I'm not going, and it's always the man. The women, you guys are great when it comes to wanting to get help and wanting to seek help. You guys are great with that. It's the men who say, well, I'm not sitting in front of another man, but you can sit here and abuse your wife. You're okay with that, but you're not okay with that. You're okay with putting your hands on your wife, but you're not okay to go sit in front of another man and have him help you navigate your emotions and help you, work through what it is you're going through. Why is that seen as like a weakness? But even weaker than not going to see a counselor is hitting your wife. That's the ultimate sign of weakness. But getting help. You notice signs of domestic abuse, then you have to get help. And last, putting pressure on the local imams and mosques, Islamic communities, to offer more classes on domestic abuse. There should not be, with everything that is going on right now, there should not be a masjid, a mosque, from New York to California, except that there is some type of domestic violence awareness going on in those mosques. With everything that is going on, how could we just the imam get up and give a khutbah about prayer or about dhikr and just totally overlooking the important issues in our, here again, majoring in the minor, minoring in the major. You're going to get up and give a whole sermon on Friday about prayer and why prayer is important and why Muslims are not praying and why they should be praying. Meanwhile, there's women in your community, women around America in our communities that are being oppressed, that are being abused, and we say absolutely nothing about it. So putting pressure on the local imams and mosques to offer more classes on domestic abuse, khutbas, seminars, domestic violence training, and to bring awareness to the prevalence of this issue in our communities. Putting pressure. Just like we get out and we march here and march there, we need to go into the imam's office, go into the community and say, why are these things not being taught in the community? With all that is going on in the community, you would think that we would be bringing awareness to this. And that's a whole other issue, because it's almost like we just don't care. So the responsibility is on us. And, either we can, do the work of God as we say that we are. As Muslims, we are supposed to be servicing God's creatures. That is our job. The mosque is there to service the community, not the community there to service the mosque. We're constantly being begged for money and charity, and we're constantly there to serve the mosque. But what is the mosque doing for the communities? And I pray that, the message was received in the best possible way. As you can see, a lot of this, my frustration with a lot of this, because this is not the first time, the second time, or third time that I've spoken out publicly about this. And the more and more, the sad thing about it is that the politics that run the mosques and that run the imams, dominates the truth of the situation. And you'll see that the more and more that you start to speak about issues like this, the more and more doors will start closing on you, because people don't necessarily really want to be affiliated with that. Either the shame or it's just not aligned with the politics of that particular religious institution. And that's okay, because as long as we have a voice, as long as we have social media, as long as we have faith that we are doing the right thing, we let God handle everything else. Right? We let Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala handle everything else. My job is to convey the message. How it affects you, how it impacts you, what you take away from it, that's totally out of my hands. In ending, Prophet Muhammad stood in front of an army when they were getting ready to fight, and he grabbed a handful of dirt, and he threw that handful of dirt, and it went into the eyes of over 1,000 people. And Allah revealed a verse capturing that moment. He said, وَمَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. You didn't throw when you threw, but it was we who threw. God threw. You are responsible for the action. The outcome of it, solely in the hands of Allah.